Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation where my plans just fizzled away right before my eyes. Hello and welcome to those new to my channel. Welcome back for those returning. This is FRR Stage 7, the second to last installment of this series. And boy, oh boy, this was probably the hardest stage we've done so far. So the ITT yesterday was definitely tough. And while I did not expect for this stage to go the same way, it's basically what happened. I was very excited about the fact that we were drafting and, it would be a good cluster of people staying together. Now, keep in mind, I'm racing this at 8 a.m. in the morning. I don't find it easy to race first thing in the morning. I generally have a harder time racing first thing in the morning because I haven't, eaten anything. My nutrition is basically, I have to modify my nutrition plan a little bit because I have to compress it into a smaller window to try and hydrate and get, some extra fuel on board. When I race, I generally just have, in terms of fueling, it's just heavy cream and some MCT oil. And that is more than enough to sustain me for the race. My energy drink, I have a variety one that I'm using right now that does have 1 gram of carbs. And I have the little essentially like a pixie stick carb powder that I take as well. But that ended up falling on the floor today, so I ended up not using it. But that's really it. That's all I use in terms of carbohydrates because it's a 1 hour race. It's generally not, well, in this case, it's a little bit longer, but generally a 1 hour race, you don't need much, especially if you've eaten throughout the day, you should be fine. And so as we're getting up the Zwift KOM, because I didn't get a chance to look at anybody else's races as a recon for myself, I looked at the map and kind of figured, okay, we're taking the Swift KOM up. I knew it wasn't going to be a segment in play. And as we're getting up this part, I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm putting out a lot of power. My legs hurt. Yesterday really took a lot out of me, and my legs are hurting. And so I'm starting to fade back, holding, 300 plus watts, but I'm starting to fade back and starting to kind of question, like, can I stay competitive in the green jersey competition and sustain these kind of watts up these climbs? And so as you see, I end up, basically falling off the back almost immediately. So part of my plan going into this race today was because Eric Barfell is, super close to podium. I'd reached out to him and I said, hey, if I could help you, by doing a lead out and kind of, helping you with the sprints, so you can, we both have a pretty similar power when it comes to our sprints. We can launch at, 1,000 plus watts. And I figure if I could, essentially launch slightly ahead of him, he could use me to draft up to the front and, get a faster time so he can, work his way back up. He was in third place for, I think, after the first few stages, and then he ended up having a mechanical that dropped him back a few notches. Still in the top 20, but it ended up dropping him back quite a bit. And I was, working my way up, and because he and I had been racing all week at the same time, I got to, really see what kind of power he has. And I let him know. I was like, hey, you know, I'll help you out if I can, and through the sprints. But ultimately, because I got dropped immediately, I messaged him, which is what you just saw there. I messaged him, letting him know, like, hey, I got dropped immediately. If I catch up, I'll let you know. If I can't, then, you know, good luck. He's a great sprinter, so I know he was going to do great, and I know he did great. Looking at his where he's at right now in the standings, and so it was basically an ITT. I had to, push all by myself. I was hopeful that I would pull the group that he's in back because they're only 21 seconds ahead of me right now. And I thought maybe in Titans Grove I could get some momentum through there. Generally, a lot of people tend to slow down through Titans Grove. And so I figured I could get some momentum through there, but that really did not happen. So as I'm getting out of the tunnel here, because it's no longer a we, it's a me at this point. As I'm getting out of the tunnel, I'm looking at where I'm at. I'm in no man's land. I've got a 21 second gap in front of me with the next riders, and a 30, almost 40-second gap with the riders behind me. And I don't want to just stop pedaling to let the group catch up because that is also going to hurt my GC standings. Even though I'm not, a contender for the GC, I'm still moving my way up the ranks. Last time I checked, I was in 50 something place, like 53rd place, which I attribute that to attrition, not to to my skill set. And so I just thought, hey, if I could, keep the momentum going, eventually they'll catch up to me. If they do, I knew that I would end up slowing down on the Titans Grove KOM, up the actual climb. So as I'm going through Titans Grove, I'm just taking it smooth, trying to not put out a whole ton of power, but I see that the gap is getting bigger in both directions, in the sense that, or the gap is getting bigger in the backwards direction, where the group that Eric's in is pulling forward and the group that's behind me is pulling inward. They're starting to catch up to me. I didn't know this at the time, but the group behind me is essentially a mix of riders from my category, but also the K and JLP category. So as they started getting closer, I was just, looking forward to ultimately being in a group. I didn't know how big the group was. Even though I have it there on my sauce, I while I'm racing, especially while I'm trying to hold my FTP, I'm not really paying attention to the individual numbers in the group. I'm just kind of gauging at the size of the bubble, and I see, it's about 33 people, which is a good thing because that's a good size group. Um, and so I start to see their names pop up as I'm reaching the KOM, and I'm thinking like, oh, perfect. They'll, catch up to me as they do here, and as they catch up, I, you know, push out a little bit of extra power to stay on their wheel because ultimately I didn't want them to catch me and pass me because if they did, I would I'd be done. There's absolutely no way I would be competitive in the green jersey, nor would I be able to. I honestly think I wouldn't have been able to finish the race if I had to do an ITT, 40 something kilometer ITT by myself. And so, I push out a little bit extra power to stay with the group. I decided not to overpower, this climb. I'm still in the mid 300s because the pack is going really good. Like this is a really strong group of riders, at the level and the categories that they're in. And so because they were climbing at such a strong pace, I did my best to just keep up with them and hope that I could, stay with this group. And so as we get closer to the top, I'm just looking at how many people are kind of in front of me, where I'm at, and what is it going to take to continue. I'm also very exhausted. My legs hurt a lot from yesterday's stage. Not only did I feel like I did a great job holding my FTP wattage throughout that stage, but and then also sprinting on top of that. So as we, get down this descent, the group is gone. They start to pull away, and I'm at this point getting really nervous. So me and this Brazilian rider kind of go back and forth, taking turns. I want to make sure that I'm pulling, you know, making sure that I'm pulling in order to bridge the gap. I don't know what, that person was thinking, but what I'm thinking is I want to bridge the gap. I want to get there. I want to make sure that, this group does not get too far away from me. Because right now, rolling through these hills, they're starting to slowly pull away little by little. They're, essentially about 4 seconds ahead or so, maybe a little bit more. But ultimately, they get out to almost 10 seconds on this downhill. And again, I'm nervous that I'm not going to be able to catch them. And so I'm putting out a lot more power than I want to in order to catch this group. And again, I wasn't going to leave it to the Brazilian rider to bring me up to that group because I don't know what his plans were. And at the moment, I didn't want to lose the momentum to try and message him and be like, hey, let's work together. Let's bridge this gap. I was just going to go for it. So you see, I'm in the 300s right now, just, pushing harder over the hills, and trying to ease off a little bit, but at the same time, keep my momentum up on the downhill. And so as we start getting, super close, I see he put out a little bit of extra power. And so I just let him coast by me so I can bridge up to the group. And we just, kept it going. Once we got here, I was not going to let the group go. So I was doing my best to stay at the same pace as the group as we got over these little hills. Thankfully, this part of Titans Grove is not very difficult. It's just these little, downward rolling hills that as long as you keep turning the pedals, you'll basically hold your pace. Like you won't fall too far behind unless you have, some weird settings or something that just prevents you from getting over the top of the hills efficiently. So as we get into the desert here, it infinitely starts to get easier because now we're in the group, now we're in the flats. We're barely pushing, for me, zone 2 watts, which I feel I'm starting to feel better. My heart rate's in the 150s. I feel like the tempo's getting easy, but at the same time, I'm not wanting to get overconfident in the idea that I could just launch off the front and keep going. Because as much as I wanted to go faster and I wanted to not fall so far behind, because I kept thinking, you know, am I going to make the time cut? Is the time cut per category? Like, am I going to lose the, my time cut because I'm essentially riding with the next category down? Like, what's going on? And so I was nervous. And so I ultimately just decided, let me stay with this group. I'll pull when I can. Really, I did my pulls after these sprints because I, was happy at the fact that not only was I in a big group, but I could also, as we approach these sprints, I could use this group to help me get a better time and get better placement in the sprints itself. And ultimately, if there's other riders that are equally as ambitious and equally as powerful, they can latch onto my wheel and, I can help propel them to a better sprint time. And so as we start to round the corner here for the woodland sprint, I fall a little bit off the back and I got a little concerned, but I'm also, I'm trying to not get into my biggest ring right at the top of this little hill, or right as we're coming up the hill, so I don't waste wattage. But I do ultimately get into the big ring, and you can see my RPMs dropping. My RPMs drop to 50 RPMs, and so as we round the corner here for the sprint, I see the banner or the little start marker, and I launch. And thankfully, I launched just hard enough in the low 900s to catch up to the back of this group, which then set me flying through the front part of this group. I couldn't believe how fast I got to the front, and I just, held on to my watts as much as I could. I actually couldn't see my avatar at some point. I went through that group that quick, and so as I'm getting to the front here, I'm trying to hold my wattage, and I start to drop a little bit there at the end because at that point I'm like okay with what I did. I got through. It wasn't as hard as I normally would. I'm in 10th place right now in this sprint, which, for me, considering how my legs feel, even though I got quite a bit of rest with this group, I didn't want to overdo it because with this stage, it's the 4 sprints back to back. It's, essentially a sprinter's paradise type of race where we're doing the 4 sprints back to, almost back to back. And the sprints progressively get longer. We go from that sprint, I believe, is around 400 meters. The next sprint is about 300 meters or 350 meters, the Sasquatch sprint. And then the following two are like 450 and 500 meters. And so those get what feel like infinitely harder. And so as a group, comes together here, I start to question whether or not I am doing the right thing, in the sense that, should I, because this is a lower category group, even though, you know, the riders are obviously strong. They're good riders. They're here, but should I, if you look at the pens that we're in, so I'm in the C pen, in the, I think, Bond and HAB categories, I believe, are in the C pen. They're in the D pen, which is the KCAY and JLP, which is a category that I was in the first FRR that I did. And so these are still strong riders. Probably, when it comes to the Zwift racing score, they're probably in the 300s, maybe mid to upper 300s, 400s, maybe, you know, lower, or upper 200s, low 300s, maybe somewhere in that zone. Not really sure. But in the old school, it would be the D-pen category. Like, these are the, 3 watts per kilogram and under guys. And so I was thinking, like, man, should I move to the front? Should I put out more power, or should I coast? And so I do jump off the front here, um, because I wanted to give the front guys a little bit of a relief. They start to come back a little bit and ultimately end up passing me. And so as we get through here, I also see that, the group that Eric is in, were, coming up right on them. And so I sent him a quick message, let him know, like, hey, are you ready for the next one? Um, Knowing that, he's essentially right in front of us, I knew that I could, do exactly what I mentioned to him I would do. I would launch off the front, you know, up front of the group, so that way he could bridge up and, ultimately come past me. And so as we get to the Sasquatch sprint, I start to move closer to the front of the group, so that way I can essentially prepare myself as we cross the bridge. I get into, my highest gear, and really just kind of slow roll. I was hoping to get a little bit further up in the group, because I couldn't quite see where he was at. He has a backwards ball cap, and that's kind of what I was trying to pay attention to. But I couldn't quite see where he was at. So I was like, you know what, where I'm at now, I'll just launch. And I usually like to launch on the start of that downhill, so you get a little bit of extra momentum. And as you see, I ended up shooting right up to the front and just screaming past everybody. And so I slowed down a little bit because my legs were just on fire. And so I dropped my wattage into the, 300s, 500s. I had to take a pause there for a second because, again, I was cooked at this point. And I think he just came screaming past me, which, you know, I, I hope that what I did helped, especially as I, came across the line and, what looks like 31st place for this stage. But at the end of the day, I looked at it as this is exactly what I told him I would do. I did. I wanted to make sure I could, offer an opportunity to help him, since he was so much closer than I to the, um, to podium for the sprint, for the green jersey. And, if we could work together, great, because ultimately, he is definitely a stronger sprinter than I am. He can hold his wattage a lot longer than I can, as you can see. But if I could help him by, you know, essentially being a bridge for him to continue his sprint, then that also helps me move forward as well, because it allows me to essentially get better at sprinting over the long haul. And so I'm just going to forward here to the next sprint, because really at this point we're just kind of as a group staying together, and I'm making sure that I, keep with this group. And, while we're on these longer sections, I'm, pushing myself up to the front, doing what I can to get some recovery, because the one thing that I didn't expect out of going for these sprints, so the last time I did FRR, I didn't at all try to get any sort of significant placement in any of the categories. I just wanted to complete it. I figure if I could do a multi-stage race, then it would be great. But this time around, when I saw that I had a pretty decent sprint, and that the first real stage that I ended up sprinting, which was a third stage, I saw that I moved up from wherever I was at to ending in like 73rd or 74th place in the green jersey. And then the next day I did another sprint, which is basically the same stage, same sprint, and I actually successfully completed that sprint. Ended up in second place, and I did a jump from 74th to 40th place. And so I thought, okay, maybe I should actually go for the sprint points. And so again, the stage after that, we had the four sprints back to back, kind of like this one, and I jumped down some more to 27th place. And then after today's stage, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna show or I'm not gonna say where I'm at right now because there's more races to come. So I don't want to commit to where I'm at now, even though I can say that I'm so close to the goal that I had for the green jersey points. And so I launch off again and just did my best to just kind of hold my pace. Again, I'm, you know, doing what I can to kind of, in a way, survive these sprints because my legs are absolutely roasted. And even though I am losing some time here as I coast to the end, end up in 23rd place on this one. I just after yesterday's stage and then the sprints this stage, my legs are just cooked. And so like I was saying before, what I didn't expect coming out of this is how tough it would be to put out the extra power on these sprints and complete these stages. It completely gives me a whole new appreciation in such a minute way to what real World Tour racers have to go through. Because when you think about World Tour racers and some of these guys are sprinting at, 1500, 2000 watts. And, that might be the final sprint for them, but they've got intermediate sprints, they've got other, parts of the stage that they're putting out a lot of power. And so they really have to work. And it's no wonder the sprinters generally end up at the bottom end of the classifications for general classification because they're they're not staying in a strong tempo or holding maybe zone 4 zone 5, sure, but they're not holding zone 2, zone 3, zone 4 for the duration of the race until it comes to a 20-minute climb, and repeating that multiple times where the strongest climbers are maybe doing 600, 700 watts for 20, 30 minutes to get up a climb, and then they get to rest again, where these guys are completely blowing themselves up in order to finish a sprint, and then also doing 3, 4, 500 watts to stay with the group on the climbs. And so it really does give me a whole new appreciation for the dynamics of racing in that sense. And I really just did not expect it to be so much harder doing these sprints in between these stage races. And so as we start to get to the final Stoneway sprint, we're rolling through pretty easy. I'm looking around. I thought Eric was in this group. I didn't realize he had actually fallen off the back of this group because again, what I keep forgetting to mention is when you do these sprints, you launch off the front, you're hitting 40 plus 50 kilometers an hour, whatever the sprint is, and then the group comes up behind you and is still pushing at 200, 300 watts. And if you don't catch up to the group, you're like they're gone. They're going to leave you. And so putting out that extra in my case, 200, 250 watts to catch up to the group as they pass or overpower myself to stay with the group as they pass me was something completely unexpected. And it is a lot harder than I thought it would be. It really does make this race harder. And so here we go on the last sprint. I was going to give it as much as I can, even though I know that we had the climb coming up. And so I start to get into, I creeped into the 900s for a split second, but then kind of stayed in this seven, 800s and then dropped down again. And as I started going, I'm still, trying to push hard. I see this rider come past me, and I thought, maybe I can do a little surge right before the end in order to kind of keep the pressure on him. But he just flew past me, and I was okay with that. I crossed the line in ninth place, and that was ultimately it for me. I knew that my race was effectively done in the sense that I didn't need to put out a lot more effort. I just needed to not fall so far behind that I end up not making the time cut. And again, as the group is starting to pass me here, at this point, because I knew the climb was coming up, I thought, you know what? I'm going to let them pass me. I'm going to kind of slow roll to the base of the climb, which is, coming up and not, maybe 100 meters, something like that. It's not very far away. I figured I'd just slow roll, let them pass me. I'm not worried about, trying to keep up at this point. And then the next goal for me is just making it to the top of these climbs. I know that just the Mayan climb by itself would be surmountable, but getting up both the climbs after all of this stage, spending a lot of time by myself, spending a lot of time, on these back-to-back sprints, I knew that getting up both these climbs was going to be a big effort. And so while I started to get into this climb, I just started thinking about, okay, what can I reasonably do? Can I hold 250 watts and, kind of sustain that for the rest of the climb, which looking at my heart rate, I'm in the 140s right now. So I'm reasonably, rested, but my legs were cooked, absolutely cooked. So I thought, you know what, let me test the legs. Let me see how far I can take this effort and see if I could, kind of hold this upper 200, mid 200 watt up the, base of this climb. And as I was climbing up, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can hold this for the entire duration of these two climbs because it roughly would take me about 10 minutes between the two climbs. My PR for the Mayan climb is about 4.5 minutes, maybe almost 5 minutes. And then for the Itza climb, it's going to take me roughly about the same, about 5+ minutes. And so I'm thinking like, okay, it's going to be a 10-minute climb. I don't know if I could hold it. I don't know if I could do that for, you know, for the duration of this race. And so I just took it a little bit easy on the slower parts and, ultimately put a little bit of extra pressure on the steeper parts. So I'm just going to fast forward through this because it's really at this point, I am doing my best to not fall so far behind because I know there's a couple riders in my same category that are around me, a couple ahead of me, a couple behind me. And I just thought, hey, if I could take a few places back, great. But if not, it is what it is. So as I start coming up, with these two riders, that rider just really, you know, pushed me to push myself, but also, push themselves harder. And as we got to the top here, I, really was just my legs were beyond the limit. I end up, I unintentionally caused myself to stall out because I lowered my gears, started, kind of easing off the pedals, and because I didn't make it all the way to the top of that part of the climb, and I wasn't on the flat spot, my momentum just came to almost a complete stop. And so the group that was essentially behind me ended up passing me. And at this point, because I knew there was a little bit of a flat there, I could rest and kind of ease through it. And as I come up this part of the climb, I know that there's another, this next, flat part downhill that I could eat, that I could kind of rest a little bit more. And that's basically how I handle the rest of this stage, is just doing my best to, work within work within how I felt. I'm trying to stay within my FTP on the steeper bits of the climb, so that way I'm not falling too far behind. But also, I'm just ready to be done. I'm ready to get to the end of this stage. Again, this stage was a lot harder than I thought. I don't know if it's because of the timing, because the group that I'm riding with is much stronger than I expected. I don't know if it's because my legs are hurting much more because of yesterday's ITT and the fact that the day prior I didn't take a rest day like I should have. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. I just needed to get to the end of the stage, because what's coming up tomorrow is going to be absolutely a test of more a test of my mental abilities than my physical abilities, because it is going to be long, it's going to be hard, and as long as I can get up the Alpe du Zwift, then I know I will be able to complete the rest of the stage with little effort, in the sense that I know that I'll make it to the end if I can get up the Alpe du Zwift. That really is going to be the hardest part for me. And so as I crossed the line, stayed in 69th place, even though there was a rider that passed me. That rider's in a different category, which is why you don't see my placement drop here. But I was happy to be done with this. So I end up, taking myself um, down the grade so I can get some extra distance there. And that's where we end. So I will catch you guys on the next and final installment of this FRR race.